This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
Ishmael, a young schoolteacher, felt the heavy cloak of depression settling upon his shoulders. An irresistible urge to go to sea consumed him, promising escape from the mundane life that threatened to suffocate his spirit. The salty breeze whispered through the streets of Manhattan, carrying with it the promise of adventure and freedom. It tugged at Ishmael's clothes and tousled his hair, as if trying to pull him towards the harbor. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as he made the decision to sign on as a crew member of a whaling ship. The thought of exploring the vast, watery part of the world filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He imagined standing on the deck of a mighty vessel, the endless horizon stretching before him like a canvas of possibilities. The monotonous rhythm of his current life faded away, replaced by the thrilling prospect of battling giant whales and discovering far-off lands. Leaving behind the familiar cobblestone streets and towering buildings of Manhattan, Ishmael set his sights on New Bedford, a bustling whaling port that held the promise of a new beginning. The journey was long, each mile putting more distance between him and his old life. As night fell, he found himself stepping onto the worn cobblestone streets of the port town, his pockets as empty as the life he'd left behind. The air was thick with the scent of salt and tar, a pungent mixture that filled his nostrils and made his eyes water. The distant sound of waves lapping against wooden hulls created a rhythmic backdrop to the bustling nightlife, a constant reminder of the adventure that awaited him. Weathered sailors stumbled past, their faces etched with stories of distant shores and perilous voyages. Their laughter was rough and their gait unsteady, but there was a glint in their eyes that spoke of a life lived to the fullest. Dim light spilled from tavern windows, carrying with it the raucous laughter and sea shanties of men who lived their lives by the tide. The melodies, unfamiliar yet enticing, pulled at Ishmael's curiosity. He found himself drawn to the warmth and camaraderie that seemed to emanate from these establishments, a stark contrast to the cold loneliness he'd left behind. As Ishmael wandered the winding streets, his eyes wide with wonder, he stumbled upon the Whaleman's Chapel. The old building stood like a sentinel, its weathered stone facade a testament to the countless prayers and farewells it had witnessed. Inside, the air was heavy with the weight of memory and loss. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere of reverence and solemnity. His gaze fell upon the marble tablets lining the walls, each one a solemn tribute to a sailor who never returned home. The names etched in stone seemed to whisper warnings of the dangers that lay ahead. For a moment, doubt crept into Ishmael's heart like a cold fog, chilling him to the bone. The reality of the perilous life he was choosing hit him with full force, but he pushed the fear aside, his determination burning brighter than ever, like a flame that refused to be extinguished. Leaving the chapel, Ishmael resumed his search for affordable lodging. The night grew colder, the wind picking up and cutting through his thin jacket. Fatigue began to set in, his legs growing heavy with each step. Just as hope started to fade, he spotted the weathered sign of the Spouter Inn, swinging gently in the breeze like a beacon of salvation. Inside, he met Peter Coffin, the innkeeper, whose name sent an involuntary shiver down Ishmael's spine. The man's weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a life spent in service to the sea. With a mixture of disappointment and desperation, Ishmael learned that the inn was full. But Coffin, his eyes twinkling with mischief, offered an unusual solution. "There's a harpooner out selling his head," Coffin explained, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over stormy seas. "You can share his bed if you don't mind waiting for him to return." Exhaustion won out over hesitation, and Ishmael found himself agreeing to this strange arrangement. As he climbed the creaking stairs to the room, his mind raced with thoughts of the mysterious harpooner. Would he be a grizzled old sailor with tales of the sea? Or perhaps a young adventurer like himself, seeking fortune and glory? Settling onto the bed, Ishmael's imagination ran wild. He pictured himself standing on the deck of a mighty whaling ship, the wind whipping through his hair, and the vast ocean stretching out before him like an endless blue desert. The thrill of the hunt, the camaraderie of the crew, the exotic ports of call, all of it danced through his mind like tantalizing mirages. As the night wore on, Ishmael's excitement gave way to exhaustion. His eyelids grew heavy, and he found himself drifting off to sleep, lulled by the distant sound of the sea and the promise of adventures to come. Little did he know that the extraordinary events about to unfold would surpass even his wildest dreams. Just as Ishmael was about to succumb to slumber, a sudden commotion jolted him back to consciousness. The floorboards outside his room creaked ominously, and a shadow fell across the gap beneath the door. His heart pounding, Ishmael sat up in bed, his eyes fixed on the doorknob as it slowly began to turn. The dead of night was shattered by a sudden disturbance. Ishmael, jolted from his slumber, found himself face to face with an unexpected visitor. His heart pounded against his ribs like a caged animal as he beheld the imposing figure looming over him. The room, once a sanctuary of rest, now felt suffocating and alien. Moonlight filtered through the grimy window, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. In this eerie half-light, Ishmael's eyes widened as they traced the intricate patterns etched into the stranger's skin. The man before him was a living canvas, his body adorned with swirling tattoos that seemed to writhe in the flickering candlelight. "Landlord, help!" Ishmael's voice cracked, fear clawing at his throat. The floorboards groaned under hurried footsteps, each creak amplifying the tension in the room. Peter Coffin, the innkeeper, burst through the door, his nightcap askew. "Easy there, Ishmael," he said, his calm tone a stark contrast to the panic that gripped the room. "This here's Queequeg. He may look fierce, but he's harmless as a lamb." Ishmael's gaze darted between Coffin and the stranger. Queequeg. The Polynesian harpooner stood motionless, his dark eyes fixed on Ishmael with an unreadable expression. In his hand, he clutched a harpoon that gleamed menacingly in the dim light. As the initial shock began to subside, Ishmael felt a cautious curiosity stirring within him. I suppose we must share the bed," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Queequeg nodded solemnly, setting his harpoon against the wall with surprising gentleness. The night passed in a haze of fitful sleep and wary glances. As dawn's first light crept through the window, painting the room in soft hues of pink and gold, Ishmael found himself captivated by Queequeg's morning rituals. The harpooner moved with a grace that belied his size, his movements fluid and purposeful as he retrieved a small wooden idol from his bag. "Yojo," Queequeg murmured, his voice deep and resonant. He placed the idol on a small table, kneeling before it with reverence. Ishmael watched, transfixed, as Queequeg offered a biscuit to Yojo, his lips moving in silent prayer. The fear that had gripped Ishmael earlier melted away like morning mist. In its place grew a sense of wonder and respect. Queequeg's eyes, which had seemed so alien and threatening in the night, now shone with kindness and wisdom. As they shared a simple breakfast of hardtack and coffee, Ishmael felt compelled to bridge the gap between their worlds. In a moment of spontaneity, he joined Queequeg in his worship, bowing his head before Yojo. The harpooner's face lit up with a smile that transformed his features, erasing any lingering doubts in Ishmael's mind. "Show me your skill," Ishmael found himself saying, gesturing to the harpoon. Queequeg's eyes sparkled with pride as he hefted the weapon. With a fluid motion that seemed to defy physics, he hurled the harpoon across the room. It whistled through the air, embedding itself deep in a wooden beam with pinpoint accuracy. Ishmael's jaw dropped. "Remarkable," he exclaimed, a newfound admiration blooming in his chest. Over the next few days, the two men forged an unlikely friendship. Queequeg's tales of his homeland, Rokovoko, painted vivid pictures in Ishmael's mind. He spoke of lush jungles where exotic birds called from towering trees, of pristine beaches where the sand sparkled like diamonds under the tropical sun. His words conjured images of ancient traditions and royal lineages, a world so far removed from Ishmael's own experiences that it seemed almost mythical. "Why did you leave?" Ishmael asked one evening, entranced by the harpooner's stories. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over their faces. Queequeg's eyes grew distant, like a man gazing across vast oceans. "To see world," he said simply. "Learn new things. Meet new people." Ishmael nodded, understanding the pull of adventure that had brought him to this very inn. As Queequeg spoke of cannibals and uncharted islands, Ishmael found himself drawn into a world far beyond the confines of his previous experiences. Each word was like a brushstroke, painting a picture of a life filled with danger, excitement, and discovery. With each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger. Queequeg's noble character and worldly wisdom challenged Ishmael's preconceptions, opening his eyes to the rich tapestry of human experience. He began to see the world through new eyes, realizing how narrow his view had been before meeting this extraordinary man. As they sat by the fireplace on their final night at the inn, a comfortable silence fell between them. The flames danced, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Ishmael cleared his throat, breaking the quiet. "Queequeg," he said, his voice filled with newfound determination. "What would you say to seeking a whaling ship together?" The harpooner's face broke into a wide grin, his teeth gleaming in the firelight. He extended his hand, rough and calloused from years at sea. Ishmael grasped it firmly, sealing a partnership that would carry them through the adventures to come. As they shook hands, a sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes. The candle on the table sputtered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. In that moment, Ishmael felt a shiver run down his spine, not of fear, but of anticipation. He knew that tomorrow would bring new horizons, new challenges, and perhaps even danger. But with Queequeg by his side, he felt ready to face whatever the vast, unforgiving sea might throw their way. Little did they know that their journey would lead them to Nantucket, the very heart of the whaling industry, where fate awaited them with open arms and hidden perils. Ishmael and Queequeg set their sights on Nantucket, the beating heart of the whaling industry. With dreams of adventure and fortune, they embarked on a journey to find a suitable ship for their grand voyage. The salty air stung their nostrils as they stepped onto the bustling docks of Nantucket. The cacophony of sea shanties and rough laughter filled their ears, mingling with the creaking of ships and the cries of gulls overhead. Weathered sailors with sun-leathered skin bustled about, their calloused hands working ropes and crates with practiced ease. Amidst the chaos, a figure emerged from the shadows like a specter from the mist. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling knowledge that sent a shiver down Ishmael's spine. "Elijah's the name," he rasped, his voice as rough as sandpaper. He fixed them with a penetrating stare that seemed to pierce their very souls. "You be seeking passage on the Pequod, aye?" His words dripped with foreboding as he warned of the perils that awaited those who sailed under Captain Ahab. Ishmael felt his stomach churn with a mixture of excitement and dread. He glanced at Queequeg, whose stoic expression betrayed no emotion, but whose hand tightened imperceptibly on his harpoon. Brushing off Elijah's cryptic warnings like bothersome flies, the pair sought out the Pequod's owners. They found themselves face to face with Captains Peleg and Bildad, a study in contrast if ever there was one. Peleg was a tempest in human form, his booming voice crashing over them like waves on a stormy sea. "You want to sail, do ye? Well, let's see what you're made of," he bellowed, his face ruddy with excitement. The air around him seemed to crackle with energy, and Ishmael found himself both drawn to and intimidated by the man's larger-than-life presence. Bildad, on the other hand, was as still as a calm sea, his quiet demeanor belying a deep-rooted piety. Scripture flowed from his lips as easily as breath, a soothing counterpoint to Peleg's thunderous presence. His eyes, though, held a sharpness that spoke of a keen business mind beneath the veneer of religious devotion. The air crackled with tension as they haggled over terms. Ishmael, green as the hills of his homeland, felt his palms grow sweaty as he signed on as a novice sailor. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, the unknown stretching before him like an endless ocean. Queequeg, however, had a chance to showcase his prowess. With a grace that belied his imposing stature, he demonstrated his harpooning skills. The harpoon whistled through the air, a deadly silver arc that found its mark with pinpoint accuracy. Peleg's eyes widened with appreciation, and even Bildad nodded his approval. Without hesitation, Queequeg was signed on as a skilled harpooner, his place on the Pequod secured. As they prepared for their departure, whispers of Captain Ahab's condition reached their ears like a chill wind. The captain, they learned, was still recovering from a grievous injury, a leg lost to the very creatures they sought to hunt. Yet his iron will would not be denied, and he would command the voyage nonetheless. Ishmael felt a mixture of awe and unease at the thought of serving under such a man. The days leading up to their departure were a whirlwind of activity. Ishmael and Queequeg threw themselves into the task of loading supplies, their muscles straining under the weight of crates and barrels. The Pequod slowly came to life around them, its wooden bones creaking with anticipation. The smell of tar and hemp rope filled the air, mingling with the briny scent of the sea. As they worked, they began to meet their fellow crew members. The ship's three mates emerged as distinct personalities, each leaving an indelible impression. Starbuck, the first mate, was a rock in human form. His pragmatic nature and steady gaze spoke of a man who had seen the worst the sea could offer and remained unbroken. His quiet strength was a balm to Ishmael's nerves, a promise of stability in the face of the unknown. Stubb, the second mate, was a stark contrast. His jovial nature and ready laugh a balm to the soul in the face of the unknown. His eyes twinkled with mischief, and his jokes lightened the mood even as the weight of their impending journey settled on their shoulders. Flask, the third mate, burned with an inner fire, his passion for the hunt evident in every movement and word. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Ishmael found himself caught up in the man's fervor, imagining the thrill of the chase and the triumph of the catch. As Christmas Day dawned, the docks were alive with a frenzy of last-minute preparations. Loved ones clung to departing sailors, their embraces tinged with the bitter-sweet knowledge of the long separation to come. The air was thick with a mixture of excitement, fear, and sorrow. Ishmael watched these scenes with a lump in his throat, grateful for Queequeg's steady presence at his side. Finally, with a creaking of ropes and a billowing of sails, the Pequod set forth. As Nantucket faded into the distance, becoming nothing more than a smudge on the horizon, Ishmael felt his heart swell with a potent mixture of emotions. Excitement coursed through his veins at the thought of the adventures that lay ahead. Yet a tendril of trepidation coiled in his gut, a premonition of the trials to come. Little did Ishmael know, as he stood at the rail watching his old life disappear, that the true nature of their mission was yet to be revealed. The obsession that drove their unseen captain would soon cast a long shadow over their 3-year voyage, shaping their destinies in ways they could never have imagined. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ishmael felt a chill run down his spine. The wind picked up, carrying with it the salty tang of the open ocean and a whisper of something else. A sense of foreboding settled over him like a heavy cloak. What secrets did the vast, uncharted waters of the Atlantic hold? And what dark purpose drove their mysterious captain? The answers, Ishmael sensed, would reveal themselves all too soon. Several days had passed since the Pequod embarked on its whaling voyage. The ship's sails billowed with purpose, carrying the crew into the vast, uncharted waters of the Atlantic. The salty breeze whipped across the deck, carrying with it the tang of adventure and the faint, fishy smell of the sea. Sailors bustled about their duties, their voices a low murmur against the constant creaking of wood and flapping of canvas. Yet beneath this routine activity, an undercurrent of anticipation thrummed through the ship. The mysterious Captain Ahab, who had remained hidden in his cabin since their departure, was about to make his first appearance. As if summoned by the crew's collective thoughts, the cabin door swung open with a groan. The chatter died instantly, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to swallow even the sound of the waves. All eyes turned to the commanding figure now standing before them. Ahab's appearance was nothing short of striking. A jagged scar, pale as moonlight, ran down his weathered face like a bolt of lightning frozen in time. His eyes, dark and intense, seemed to hold the fury of a storm. But it was his leg, or rather the lack of it, that truly captured attention. In place of flesh and bone stood a prosthetic made of polished whalebone, gleaming in the sunlight as if mocking the very creatures they hunted. The captain's piercing gaze swept across the deck, silencing even the creaking of the ship's timbers. The air grew thick with tension, making it hard to breathe. With a voice as rough as the sea itself, Ahab called the crew to gather round. They huddled close, drawn by an invisible force that seemed to emanate from their enigmatic leader. "Men," Ahab began, his words cutting through the salty air like a harpoon. You signed on to hunt whales, but there's more to our journey than mere profit. His eyes blazed with an inner fire as he continued. We sail in pursuit of Moby Dick, the white whale that took my leg and has haunted my dreams ever since. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled sailors. The name Moby Dick hung in the air, heavy with menace and mystery. Ahab's fervor was infectious, his words painting vivid images of a monstrous leviathan lurking in the depths. The captain's passion ignited a spark of excitement in the crew, mixed with a tinge of fear that sent shivers down their spines. With theatrical flair, Ahab produced a gleaming gold doubloon. The coin caught the sun's rays, winking at the mesmerized sailors like a promise of untold riches. This, Ahab declared, his voice rising to a fever pitch, is for the first man who spots the white whale. In a dramatic gesture, he nailed the doubloon to the mast, where it shone like a beacon of hope and doom. The crew's excitement bubbled over, their voices rising in a chilling chant. Death to Moby Dick! Death to the white whale! The words echoed across the waves, a battle cry against nature itself. They swore a blood oath, their unity forged in the heat of Ahab's vengeful mission. Yet amidst the fervor, one voice dared to speak against the tide. Starbuck, the first mate, stepped forward, his face etched with concern. His steady gaze met Ahab's fiery one, a clash of reason against passion. Captain, he said, his words measured but firm, is it not our duty to hunt whales for profit, to seek vengeance against a dumb brute? It seems blasphemous. Ahab's eyes narrowed, his gaze as sharp as a harpoon. The air crackled with tension, every sailor holding their breath. Blasphemous, you say, he spat, contempt dripping from every word. I'd strike the sun if it insulted me, Starbuck. Who's over me? Truth hath no confines. The captain's words hung in the air, a clear warning that dissent would not be tolerated. As if to underscore Ahab's absolute authority, the crew suddenly became aware of new faces among them. Fadala and his band of Asian sailors, secretly brought aboard by the captain, emerged from the shadows. Their presence added an air of mystery and unease to the already charged atmosphere. Whispers rippled through the crew, speculation about these strange new additions mixing with growing concern about their captain's state of mind. The reality of their captain's monomaniacal quest began to sink in. The Pequod was no longer just a whaling ship. It had become a vessel of vengeance, with every creak of its timbers seeming to whisper Ahab's obsession. The familiar routines of shipboard life took on a new, sinister meaning. Each coil of rope could be the line that would bring them face to face with the white whale. Every harpoon gleamed with deadly purpose. As the sun dipped towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the deck, the Pequod continued its journey into the vast, unforgiving ocean. The fading light painted the sea in shades of gold and crimson, as if the water itself was ablaze with Ahab's burning desire for revenge. The ship sailed on, now charged with a mission that went beyond mere whaling. The crew retired to their bunks that night, their dreams filled with images of monstrous white whales and golden doubloons. But as they tossed and turned, a new sight greeted the night watch. In the distance, telltale spouts of water rose from the sea, backlit by the rising moon. The Pequod had sailed into waters teeming with whales, a sight that filled the crew with eager anticipation. Rich whaling grounds stretched out before them, promising both danger and reward. But would these be mere practice for the ultimate confrontation that lay ahead? The Pequod sailed into waters teeming with whales, a sight that filled the crew with eager anticipation. Rich whaling grounds stretched out before them, promising both danger and reward. The salty breeze carried the unmistakable scent of whale spouts, mingling with the creaking of the ship's timbers and the flapping of canvas sails. Ishmael stood at the rail, his calloused hands gripping the weathered wood as he scanned the horizon. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, each distant spout sending a jolt through his body. "There she blows!" The cry rang out from above, and Ishmael's eyes darted to where a plume of mist erupted from the sea's surface. He'd learned quickly to distinguish between the lazy, angled blow of a right whale and the powerful vertical column of a sperm whale. This was definitely the latter. The deck erupted into a flurry of activity. Sailors rushed to their stations, the complex system of signals now second nature to Ishmael. His hands moved in sync with the seasoned crew around him, a dance of ropes and pulleys that readied the whaleboats for lowering. Starbuck's voice cut through the chaos, steady and firm. "Easy, men. We approach with caution." His face, etched with worry lines, betrayed the weight of too many close calls. Yet his crew moved with practiced precision, their trust in their leader evident. A raucous laugh split the air as Stubbs' boat hit the water. "Last one to the whale buys the grog," he shouted, his fearlessness infectious. His crew pulled at their oars with renewed vigor, their faces a mix of determination and wild excitement. Flask, small but fierce, stood in the bow of his boat like a conquering hero. "Row, you sea dog," he bellowed. "That whale's got my name on it." His reckless courage earned him wary glances from his crew, but they followed without hesitation. Ishmael found himself in Starbuck's boat, his heart pounding as they closed in on their quarry. The whale's massive form loomed beneath the waves, a dark shadow of immense power. The harpoon flew true, and suddenly they were hurtling through the water, towed by the enraged beast. The Nantucket sleigh ride was unlike anything Ishmael had ever experienced. Wind whipped at his face, salt spray stinging his eyes as he clung to the side of the boat. The line sang with tension, the whale's strength threatening to tear them apart at any moment. It was terror and exhilaration rolled into one, a dance with death that left him breathless and more alive than he'd ever felt. When the whale finally tired, the real work began. Ishmael watched, fascinated and slightly nauseated, as the massive carcass was stripped of its valuable blubber. The deck ran slick with blood and oil, the air thick with the stench of death and the metallic tang of profit. The gruesome process of rendering the blubber into oil was a stark reminder of the brutal nature of their work. Between hunts, Ishmael found solace in his shifts at the masthead. Perched high above the deck, he kept a lonely vigil, his eyes constantly searching for the telltale signs of their prey. In those long hours of solitude, surrounded by nothing but sea and sky, his mind wandered. The vastness of the ocean mirrored the depths of human existence, and Ishmael found himself pondering life's great mysteries as he swayed gently in his lofty perch. As the days passed, a growing unease settled over the ship like a fog. Captain Ahab's obsession with Moby Dick became more apparent with each passing ship they encountered. His eyes, wild with a mix of hope and desperation, searched the faces of other captains for any news of the white whale. With each fruitless encounter, Ahab's mood darkened, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic. The crew, once united in their purpose of hunting whales for profit, began to sense a shift in the wind. Whispers of concern passed between sailors during the night watches. The official mission of the Pequod seemed to be slipping away, replaced by Ahab's all-consuming quest for vengeance. As they sailed deeper into the hunting grounds, the tension on board grew, a palpable force that set every man on edge. The horizon seemed to darken with each passing day, as if nature itself was warning them of the storms to come. It was on a particularly still evening when the lookout's cry pierced the air. "Sail ho!" All eyes turned to the approaching ship, its sails billowing in the dying light. As it drew nearer, Ishmael felt a chill run down his spine. The ship's hull was scarred and battered, its crew moving with an air of grim determination. Something about this encounter felt different, portentous. What news would this ship bring, and how would it fuel the fire of Ahab's obsession? The Pequod's journey is marked by a series of encounters with other whaling ships. Each meeting serves a dual purpose, building the mythology around Moby Dick and heightening the sense of impending doom surrounding Ahab's quest. The vast rolling ocean stretched endlessly before the Pequod, its waves whispering secrets of the deep. Salt spray stung the eyes of the crew, a motley group of seasoned sailors who stood alert at their posts. Their calloused hands gripped the rigging, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of other vessels or the telltale spout of a whale. It wasn't long before they spotted their first significant encounter, the Goni. As the two ships drew near, anticipation crackled in the air like static electricity. The crew's hearts quickened, hoping for news from home or tales of rich whaling grounds. The Goni's captain, a weathered man with salt and pepper hair, stepped to the rail. His face was a map of wrinkles etched by years at sea. He raised a speaking trumpet to his lips, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. In a cruel twist, the trumpet slipped from his grasp, plummeting into the churning sea below. The message, whatever it may have been, was lost to the depths. The crew of the Pequod watched in stunned silence as the Ghani sailed away, the failed communication hanging over them like a dark cloud. First Mate Starbuck muttered under his breath, "An ill omen, if ever there was one." His words sent a shiver down the spines of the nearby sailors. Days passed, the monotony of endless sea and sky broken only by the occasional whale sighting. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the deck into a frying pan. Then on the horizon, another ship appeared, the Jeroboam. As they drew closer, a figure on the Jeroboam's deck caught everyone's attention. Wild-eyed and unkempt, he stood apart from the rest of the crew, his presence unsettling. "That's Gabriel," someone whispered, voice tinged with awe and fear. "They say he's a prophet." Gabriel's voice carried across the water, his words chilling the Pequod's crew to the bone. He spoke of doom for those who dared to hunt Moby Dick, recounting a deadly encounter that had claimed the life of the Jeroboam's first mate. His tale was vivid, painting a picture of the white whale's terrible power and fury. The crew could almost hear the cracking of timbers and the screams of dying men in Gabriel's words. But Captain Ahab stood unmoved, his face a mask of grim determination. If anything, Gabriel's warning seemed to fuel his obsession, his eyes glinting with a dangerous light as he ordered the Pequod to sail on. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, doubt taking root in their hearts. The most significant encounter came when they crossed paths with the Samuel Enderby. The ship's captain, a one-armed man, stood at the rail, his empty sleeve fluttering in the breeze like a white flag of surrender. Ahab's eyes locked onto that empty sleeve, recognizing a kindred spirit, another victim of Moby Dick. Without warning, Ahab launched himself towards the Enderby, his eagerness causing his whalebone leg to splinter against the ship's side. The crack echoed across the water, a sound that made the crew wince and their stomachs turn. But Ahab paid no heed to his injury, his mind focused solely on gleaning information about the white whale. The Enderby's captain, however, offered no comfort. His words were a caution, a plea to abandon the hunt. "That whale is death itself," he warned, his voice heavy with experience. But his advice fell on deaf ears, serving only to stoke the fires of Ahab's rage. The captain's eyes burned with a fervor that bordered on madness. As they sailed away from the Enderby, the mood on the Pequod grew darker. The crew exchanged worried glances, the weight of their captain's obsession pressing down on them all. The very air seemed thick with foreboding. In stark contrast to these grim encounters, the Pequod's next meeting was with the Bachelor, a ship riding high in the water, its hold full of precious whale oil. The Bachelor's crew were a jovial lot, their faces bright with the promise of home and hearth. Their laughter carried across the waves, a painful reminder of what might have been, of the successful, joyous voyage the Pequod could have had, if not for Ahab's all-consuming quest. As the ships passed, the Bachelor's crew called out in celebration. The sound was like a knife twisting in the hearts of the Pequod sailors. They could almost taste the ale and feel the warmth of loved ones' embraces that awaited the Bachelor's crew. The Pequod sailed on, leaving the Bachelor behind. With each encounter, each warning unheeded, the sense of unease among the crew grew. They could feel it in their bones. They were being drawn towards something terrible, something that might well spell their doom. Yet on they sailed, prisoners to their captain's will, into the vast, unforgiving sea. As night fell, an eerie calm settled over the ocean. The stars above seemed to dim, as if sensing the impending danger. The crew huddled together, their whispers barely audible above the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. Suddenly a cry rang out from the crow's nest. "Land ho!" All eyes turned to the horizon, where a dark mass loomed in the distance. Was it an island or something more sinister? As they drew closer, the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretched before them, an endless blue horizon. It promised both adventure and peril to those who dared to sail its waters. What secrets lay hidden in its depths? What fate awaited the Pequod and her crew? The vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretched before them, an endless blue horizon. It promised both adventure and peril to those who dared to sail its waters. Ishmael leaned against the ship's rail, his eyes fixed on the night sky above. The familiar constellations of his youth were slowly fading, replaced by unfamiliar patterns. It was as if an invisible hand was drawing a celestial curtain across the heavens, revealing a new world of stars. "See there, lad?" First Mate Starbuck's gravelly voice cut through the night air, startling Ishmael from his thoughts. The young sailor turned to find the weathered seaman pointing upward. "That's the Southern Cross. Learn it well, for it'll guide us through these strange seas." Ishmael nodded eagerly, drinking in every word as Starbuck's calloused hands traced invisible lines between the stars. The older man's knowledge seemed as vast as the ocean itself, connecting the dots of a cosmic map that Ishmael was only beginning to understand. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the crew gathered on deck for the time-honored rituals of crossing the equator. For a brief, joyous moment, laughter echoed across the waves. Seasoned sailors playfully hazed the greenhorns, their rough affection a stark contrast to the growing tension that had begun to permeate the ship. Ishmael found himself at the center of the festivities, doused with buckets of seawater that left him sputtering and gasping. Despite the shock of the cold water, he couldn't help but grin. The taste of salt on his lips and the sting in his eyes were small prices to pay for this sense of belonging. But the levity was short-lived. As they sailed deeper into tropical waters, new challenges arose like sea monsters from the depths. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the wooden deck into a frying pan. Men worked with shirts plastered to their backs, sweat stinging their eyes and leaving trails of salt on their sun-reddened skin. Without warning, the sky would darken, transforming from brilliant blue to an ominous gray in a matter of minutes. Squalls descended upon them like angry fists, wind howling through the rigging and rain lashing at their faces. Ishmael clung to the ropes, his heart pounding in his chest as waves crashed over the bow. The salty spray stung his eyes and he could taste fear in the back of his throat as the unforgiving sea threatened to sweep them all into its depths. Then just as suddenly, the wind would die. The Pequod found itself becalmed in the doldrums, sails hanging limp and useless. The abrupt silence was almost more unnerving than the storm's fury. The crew paced restlessly, their nerves fraying in the eerie stillness. The only sounds were the creaking of the ship and the occasional slap of water against the hull. But oh, the wonders they saw in these alien waters. Ishmael's quill flew across the pages of his journal, desperate to capture every miraculous sight. Schools of flying fish burst from the waves like silver arrows, their scales glinting in the sun before they disappeared beneath the surface. At night, the ship's wake glowed with an otherworldly light, bioluminescent creatures painting the sea with liquid starlight. It was as if they sailed through a river of stars. And the whales, massive pods, breached the surface in displays that took Ishmael's breath away. Their enormous bodies arced gracefully through the air, water cascading off their sleek forms before they crashed back into the sea with thunderous splashes. Each sighting sent a ripple of excitement through the crew, but it was tinged with a growing unease. For with each passing day, Captain Ahab grew more restless, more consumed by his obsession. He emerged from his cabin with dark circles under his eyes, his face gaunt and his gaze wild. He pored over charts and consulted his strange sextant, muttering to himself in a way that made the crew exchange worried glances. When he spoke, it was only to bark orders or demand reports of any white whale sightings. The crew's whispers grew louder, their sideways glances more frequent. They were adrift in more ways than one, cut off from the familiar world they'd left behind. The vastness of the ocean seemed to mirror the growing distance between them and their captain's sanity. Starbuck, his face lined with worry, confronted Ahab on the quarterdeck. The tension between them was palpable, like electricity crackling in the air before a storm. "Captain," he said, his voice low but firm, "we've strayed far from our intended course. The men are growing anxious. Perhaps we should—" Ahab's eyes flashed dangerously, cutting off Starbuck's words. "You forget yourself, Mr. Starbuck," he growled, his voice low and menacing. The captain's fingers tightened on the rail, his knuckles white with barely contained rage. I am the master of this ship and will sail to the ends of the earth if that's what it takes to find that demon in white. Starbuck fell silent, but the set of his jaw spoke volumes. The rift between captain and first mate was widening, a chasm as vast as the ocean itself. Ishmael watched the exchange with a growing sense of dread, feeling as if he were witnessing the first cracks in the foundation of their voyage. As the Pequod caught the trade winds, its pace quickened. They were racing towards their destiny now, though none could say what awaited them. The endless blue of the Pacific surrounded them on all sides, an isolation more complete than any they'd ever known. The horizon seemed to mock them, always receding, never growing closer. Once easy camaraderie gave way to wary glances and hushed conversations. Each man found himself alone with his thoughts, wondering if they would ever see home again, or if Ahab's mad quest would be their undoing. Ishmael felt the weight of uncertainty settling over the ship like a fog, clouding their judgment and their hopes. The Pequod sailed on, a tiny speck in the vastness of the sea, carrying its crew towards an uncertain fate. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Ishmael couldn't shake the feeling that they were sailing into the mouth of some great beast, one that might swallow them whole. Just as the last light faded from the sky, a cry rang out from the crow's nest. "Man down! Man down!" The deck erupted into chaos as sailors rushed to see what had happened. Ishmael's heart raced as he pushed through the crowd, only to see Queequeg, the stalwart harpooner, collapse to the deck. The mighty warrior's face was ashen, his body racked with tremors. As the crew gathered around their fallen comrade, a chill ran down Ishmael's spine. What new peril was this that could fell even the strongest among them? The monotonous rhythm of the long voyage was suddenly shattered. Queequeg, the stalwart harpooner, fell gravely ill. A mysterious fever gripped Queequeg, leaving him weak and delirious. The news spread through the Pequod like wildfire, setting the wooden decks creaking under the weight of worry. The once invigorating salty air now carried the heavy scent of impending loss, thick enough to choke on. Ishmael's heart sank as he kept constant vigil by his friend's side. He watched the gentle rise and fall of Queequeg's chest, each breath a small victory against the encroaching darkness. The ship's usual bustle faded to a hush, as if the very timbers held their breath in anticipation. "Hold on, my friend," Ishmael whispered, his voice barely audible over the lapping waves against the hull. As Queequeg's condition worsened, the ship's carpenter was summoned. The man's face was grim as he set about his task, constructing a coffin according to the customs of Queequeg's people. The sound of sawing and hammering echoed through the ship, a mournful melody that seemed to herald death's approach. Ishmael, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, found himself lost in reflection. He marveled at the depth of his friendship with Queequeg, a bond that had been forged in the crucible of the sea. The thought of losing his steadfast companion made the vast ocean seem even more immense and unforgiving. In a moment of lucidity, Queequeg beckoned Ishmael closer. His once strong voice was now barely a whisper, each word a struggle against the fever's grip. "Ishmael," he rasped, "my will. Write it down." With trembling hands, Ishmael recorded Queequeg's final wishes, each word a testament to the trust between them. As the ink dried, so too did the tears that threatened to fall from Ishmael's eyes. As if sensing the fleeting nature of his time, Queequeg rallied his remaining strength. With painstaking care, he began to decorate his coffin, transforming the plain wood into a canvas of his life story. Each carving was a window into Queequeg's world, telling tales of his homeland and the rich tapestry of his culture. The crew watched in silent awe, their superstitions momentarily forgotten in the face of such raw humanity. Even the most hardened sailors found themselves moved by the sight of Queequeg's artistry in the face of death. The ship seemed to hold its breath, the usual bustle of maritime life muted by the pall of impending loss. Even the sea itself seemed to grow calmer, as if in respect for the struggle taking place on board. The crew moved about their duties like ghosts, their eyes constantly drawn to the door behind which Queequeg fought his battle. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the crisis passed. Like a ship emerging from a fog bank, Queequeg's eyes cleared, and color returned to his cheeks. He spoke of a powerful vision, of his island home bathed in sunlight, of a renewed sense of purpose that had called him back from the brink. "I saw my people," he told Ishmael, his voice growing stronger with each word. "They told me my journey was not yet complete." The news of Queequeg's recovery spread through the ship like a gust of fresh wind, lifting spirits and banishing the gloom that had settled over the Pequod. Laughter, so long absent, once again echoed across the decks. Queequeg, his strength returning with each passing hour, soon resumed his duties with a vigor that amazed all who witnessed it. The coffin, no longer needed for its grim purpose, took on new life. At Queequeg's practical suggestion, it was sealed and repurposed as a lifebuoy. This transformation seemed to embody the spirit of hope that now infused the crew, a tangible reminder that life could triumph even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. As the Pequod continued its relentless journey, the memory of Queequeg's brush with death lingered. It served as a powerful reminder of the unpredictable nature of life at sea, and foreshadowed the crucial role the coffin-turned-lifebuoy would play in the story's climax. For now, though, the crew savored this moment of respite, a brief oasis of joy in the growing tension of Ahab's obsessive pursuit. Yet as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the deck, a sense of unease began to creep back into the hearts of the sailors. The Pequod's voyage stretched on, its length seemingly endless, and the psychological strain of their captain's relentless quest began to weigh heavily upon them all. What new trials awaited them in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the ocean? The Pequod's voyage stretched on, its length seemingly endless. The crew felt the heavy toll of days turning into weeks as the psychological strain intensified with each passing moment. The once wondrous expanse of ocean now loomed like a suffocating blanket, wrapping the ship in its watery embrace. The constant creaking of timbers and the relentless crash of waves against the hull formed a maddening symphony, grating on already frayed nerves. Salt-laden air filled their lungs, a constant reminder of their isolation. It was during one of their frenzied whale chases that tragedy struck. Pip, the young African-American cabin boy, lost his footing on the slippery deck. Time seemed to slow as he tumbled overboard, his small form swallowed by the hungry sea. For what felt like an eternity, Pip floated alone, a tiny speck in the endless blue. The vastness of the ocean dwarfed him, its cold depths threatening to claim him forever. When they finally hauled him back aboard, the Pip they rescued was not the same boy who had fallen in. His eyes, once bright with youth, now held a vacant, far-off look. His mind, shattered by the ordeal, spilled forth a stream of nonsensical prophecies. Each word that tumbled from his lips sent shivers down the spines of the already on-edge crew. "The sea whispers secrets," Pip would mutter, his gaze fixed on some unseen point. "It knows our fates, written in the foam and the depths." Surprisingly, it was Captain Ahab who took a strange liking to the mad boy. The grizzled old sea captain, his face weathered like the cliffs they'd left behind, saw in Pip's fractured mind a kindred spirit. Often the crew would spot them huddled together, Ahab's scarred hand on Pip's shoulder as they spoke in hushed tones. Ahab's own behavior grew increasingly erratic as they drew closer to their target. The captain became a shadow of his former self, spending long hours alone in his cabin or on deck. The thump of his peg leg on the wooden planks became an ominous heartbeat, marking the passage of time. "I can smell him on the wind," Ahab would growl, his eyes wild and unfocused. "The white whale mocks us, but we'll have our revenge." The crew watched their captain's descent into madness with growing unease. They felt like passengers on a runaway train, hurtling towards an unknown destination with no way to change course. Whispered conversations in the dark corners of the ship spoke of mutiny, of abandoning the quest, but fear of Ahab's wrath kept such thoughts from becoming action. Starbuck, the first mate and voice of reason aboard the Pequod, found himself torn between duty and survival. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. One night, driven to desperation, he stood outside Ahab's cabin, a loaded musket in his trembling hands. The decision before him was almost too much to bear. Could he commit murder to save the lives of the crew? In the end, his moral compass won out. With a heavy sigh, he lowered the weapon, leaving the Pequod to sail on towards its doom. The guilt of his inaction would haunt him in the days to come. Adding to the atmosphere of impending disaster was Fadallah, Ahab's mysterious harpooner. The man seemed to materialize from the shadows, his dark eyes glinting with secret knowledge. His whispered prophecies about the captain's fate spread through the crew like wildfire, feeding their already overactive imaginations and deepening their superstitious fears. "The captain's fate is sealed in blood and bone," Fadallah would murmur, his words carried on the salty breeze. "The sea will claim what is hers." As the Pequod sailed on, the line between reality and nightmare began to blur for many aboard. The once cohesive crew fractured under the strain, some clinging desperately to the last shreds of their sanity, while others embraced the madness of their situation. The ship became a floating asylum, adrift on an uncaring sea, its occupants lost in a shared delusion of pursuit and revenge. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, a blank canvas on which their fears and hopes were painted. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the deck into a blistering expanse that matched the fevered minds of those aboard. At night, the stars seemed to mock them, twinkling with secrets just out of reach. As another day dawned, bringing with it the promise of continued pursuit, a cry rang out from the crow's nest. "Sail ho!" The lookout's voice cracked with excitement and fear. "Ship ahoy!" The Pequod's relentless chase was about to take an unexpected turn. On the horizon, another vessel appeared, its sails billowing in the wind. What secrets did this new ship hold? Would it bring salvation or further doom to the already beleaguered crew of the Pequod? The Pequod's relentless pursuit came to an abrupt halt. A chance encounter with another whaling ship, the Rachel, was about to change the course of their journey. The sea was unusually calm that day, its surface a mirror reflecting the crew's growing unease. As the two vessels drew near, an eerie silence fell over the Pequod. The air grew thick with tension, and the men's breath caught in their throats. Something was terribly wrong aboard the Rachel. Her sails hung limp like deflated hopes, barely stirring in the faint breeze. The crew moved with a frantic energy that spoke of desperation, their movements sharp and jerky against the stillness of the sea. The contrast was jarring, setting the Pequod's crew on edge. Captain Gardner of the Rachel stood at the rail, his figure a stark silhouette against the pale sky. As he came into focus, the Pequod's crew could see that his face was a mask of anguish. Gone was the composed demeanor of a seasoned whaling captain. In its place was a man shattered by grief, his eyes wild with despair. As Gardner locked eyes with Ahab, his composure crumbled entirely. "Plea," he cried out, his voice cracking with emotion. "My son, my boy is lost at sea." The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Gardner's plea struck the Pequod's crew like a physical blow. Many of them fathers themselves. They could feel the weight of his pain in their own hearts. The sea suddenly seemed vast and merciless, a reminder of how small and vulnerable they all were. Gardner's story spilled out in a torrent of words, each one laced with desperation. During a recent whale hunt, his young son had been aboard one of the whale boats. In the chaos of the chase, the boat had been destroyed and separated from the ship. Now the Rachel's crew was frantically combing the vast, unforgiving ocean for any sign of the missing boat and its precious cargo. As Gardner spoke, the Pequod's crew shifted uneasily. Some cast longing glances towards the horizon, squinting against the sun's glare, as if they could spot the missing whaleboat from where they stood. Others murmured among themselves, their voices a mix of sympathy and unease. The sound of lapping waves seemed to grow louder, a constant reminder of the ocean's indifference to human suffering. Starbuck, the first mate, stepped forward. His usually stern face was softened with compassion as he turned to Ahab. "Captain," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we must help them. Think of your own son, waiting back in Nantucket. If it were him lost at sea, wouldn't you want every ship in the ocean searching?" For a moment, a flicker of humanity seemed to pass across Ahab's weathered face. The crew held their breath, hope rising in their chests like a tide. The salty air seemed to still, as if the very elements were waiting for Ahab's response. But as quickly as it had appeared, the moment passed. Ahab's expression hardened, his eyes once again burning with the fire of his obsession. "We have our own hunt to finish," he growled, his voice as cold and unforgiving as the sea itself. "We cannot afford to be led astray." The crew's hope crashed like a wave against rocks. They watched in stunned silence as Ahab granted the Rachel only a brief time to search near the Pequod before forcing his ship to move on. As the Rachel faded into the distance, her crew's desperate calls for their lost comrades echoed across the water. The sound seemed to hang in the air long after the ship had disappeared from view, a haunting reminder of the price of Ahab's obsession. The encounter left a pall over the Pequod. The full weight of Ahab's inhumanity settled over the ship like a fog, chilling the crew to their very souls. They had always known their captain was driven, but this display of callousness shocked even the most hardened among them. As they sailed on, the Pequod seemed more isolated than ever. The vast, unforgiving sea stretched out around them, a reminder of their captain's choice to abandon compassion in pursuit of his vendetta. The crew went about their duties with heavy hearts, each man lost in thoughts of home, family, and the fragility of life at sea. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and red. As darkness fell, an uneasy quiet settled over the ship. The men spoke in hushed tones, their words carried away by the wind. In the growing gloom, shadows seemed to lengthen, and the creaking of the ship took on an ominous tone. Suddenly, a shout from the crow's nest shattered the silence. "Thar, she blows!" The cry echoed across the deck, electrifying the air. Hearts pounding, the crew rushed to the rails, straining their eyes against the fading light. Could it be? After months of searching, had they finally found their quarry? As the men peered into the gathering darkness, a massive shape breached the surface of the water. For a moment it hung suspended, a ghostly white form against the darkening sky. Then it crashed back into the sea with a thunderous splash, leaving the crew in a stunned silence. Moby Dick had been sighted at last. The crew of the Pequod had been searching relentlessly for months, enduring countless false alarms. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they spotted the elusive Moby Dick. The sighting sent a jolt of electricity through the ship, a mixture of excitement and terror that made the air itself feel charged. In an instant, the deck erupted into chaos. Men scrambled to the railings, their eyes wide and searching, desperate to catch a glimpse of the legendary whale. The sound of pounding feet mingled with shouts of disbelief and awe. The smell of salt and sweat hung heavy in the air, a testament to their long journey and the sudden surge of adrenaline. Captain Ahab emerged from his cabin, his transformation as sudden and dramatic as a butterfly bursting from its chrysalis. His weathered face, usually a mask of grim determination, now blazed with manic energy. His eyes, once dull with obsession, now burned like twin infernos. Each step he took echoed across the deck, his ivory leg creaking ominously, a constant reminder of his past encounter with the white whale. "There!" someone shouted, pointing to the horizon. And there it was. Moby Dick breached the surface, his massive pale form rising from the depths like a ghost from the abyss. Even from afar, there was no mistaking the creature's distinctive appearance. The whale's scarred hide gleamed in the sunlight, a patchwork of battles won and narrowly escaped. "All hands on deck!" Ahab's voice boomed, electrifying the air. He scrambled towards the maintop, his movements frenzied yet purposeful. The ivory leg protested with each rung of the ladder, but Ahab paid it no mind, his focus solely on confirming the sighting with his own eyes. From his elevated perch, Ahab surveyed the vast expanse of ocean before him. When his gaze finally locked onto Moby Dick, a triumphant cry erupted from his throat. It was a sound that sent chills down the spines of even the most hardened sailors, a primal roar of vengeance long denied. Below, the crew sprang into action like a well-oiled machine. The deck became a flurry of activity, each man acutely aware that their years-long quest was reaching its climax. The clang of metal on metal rang out as harpoons were checked and sharpened. The snap of ropes being tested for strength punctuated the air. The scrape of whaleboats being prepared echoed across the water. Ahab descended from the maintop, his eyes never leaving the horizon where Moby Dick was last seen. He made his way to his personal whaleboat, lovingly outfitted with a specially forged harpoon. The weapon gleamed wickedly in the sun, its tip stained dark with the blood of its christening, a macabre blessing for the battle to come. As the preparations neared completion, Starbuck, the first mate, made a last desperate attempt to avert disaster. His voice, usually steady and authoritative, now quivered with emotion as he pleaded with Ahab. "Captain, I beg you to reconsider," Starbuck implored, his eyes searching Ahab's face for any sign of reason. "This chase can only end in destruction. Think of the crew of the ship." But Ahab was beyond reason, beyond caution. His reply was a snarl filled with years of pent-up rage and obsession. "Lower the boats," he commanded, brooking no further argument. The other mates, Stubb, Flask, and a reluctant Starbuck, had no choice but to follow their captain's lead. They lowered their own boats, forming a deadly flotilla intent on surrounding and subduing the legendary creature. As they pushed off from the Pequod, Fedallah, Ahab's enigmatic harpooner, leaned close to the captain. His words, barely above a whisper, reminded Ahab of a dark prophecy, adding an air of supernatural dread to the already tense atmosphere. The other sailors eyed Fedallah warily, their superstitions flaring in the face of the impending confrontation. The first day of the chase unfolded like a frantic dance across the waves. Moby Dick led the whaleboats on a merry chase, surfacing and diving with a grace that belied his enormous size. The sailors rowed with all their might, their muscles burning with exertion, but the whale remained frustratingly out of reach. Ahab stood at the bow of his boat, harpoon in hand, his eyes never leaving the white form of Moby Dick. His determination was palpable, infecting his crew with a mix of awe and fear. They rowed harder, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion, driven by their captain's manic energy. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, Moby Dick made one final spectacular breach. The whale's massive form hung suspended for a moment, silhouetted against the dying light, before crashing back into the sea with a thunderous splash. And then, as if by magic, he was gone, disappearing beneath the waves as night began to fall. Far from being discouraged, Ahab's resolve only strengthened. As the whaleboats returned to the Pequod, he barked orders for the ship to maintain its course through the night. "We'll find him again at dawn," Ahab declared, his voice filled with grim certainty. As darkness settled over the ocean, an uneasy quiet descended upon the Pequod. The crew faced a sleepless night, each man lost in his own thoughts. They contemplated the battle that awaited them, wondering if they would live to see another sunset. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull provided a stark contrast to the turmoil in their hearts, as they sailed on through the night, towards an uncertain destiny. Little did they know that the confrontation with Moby Dick was far from over. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the crew of the Pequod would find themselves locked in an epic battle that would stretch over 3 grueling days at sea. Each day would bring new horrors, pushing them to their very limits and feeding the inferno of Ahab's obsession. The true test of their resolve was only just beginning. The epic confrontation with Moby Dick unfolds over 3 intense days at sea. Each day proves more devastating than the last, pushing the crew to their limits and fueling Ahab's obsession to dangerous heights. As dawn breaks on the first day, a palpable tension hangs in the air. The Pequod's wooden planks creak under the weight of anticipation. Salty spray stings the eyes of the watchful crew, their muscles taut and ready. Suddenly, a cry from the crow's nest shatters the uneasy calm. "There she blows!" The sea erupts as Moby Dick breaches the surface, his massive white form glistening like polished ivory in the harsh sunlight. Ahab's eyes ignite with a manic gleam, his gnarled hands gripping his harpoon so tightly his knuckles turn white. "At last," he whispers, his voice a rasp of long-held hatred. But the white whale isn't easily bested. With a thunderous crack that echoes across the waves, Moby Dick's enormous tail smashes into Ahab's boat. Wood splinters like matchsticks. Men fly through the air like rag dolls, their screams lost in the roar of churning water. Ahab, drenched and seething, is hauled from the frothing sea. His crew, shaken and battered, plead for caution. But the captain's fury burns hotter than reason. "Back to the chase!" he roars, his voice carrying over wind and wave. The Pequod groans as it turns, chasing the shadow beneath the waves. The second day dawns blood red, as if the sky itself bleeds in anticipation of the carnage to come. Moby Dick, no longer content to flee, becomes the hunter. The whale attacks with a fury that seems almost personal, as if seeking vengeance for every harpoon ever thrown. Boats crack like eggshells under the whale's massive bulk. Men are tossed about like leaves in a storm, their cries of terror swallowed by the unforgiving sea. The ocean froths red with blood in broken dreams. In the chaos, Fadala vanishes beneath the waves, dragged down by the very beast he helped pursue. His dark prophecy begins to unfold, sending icy tendrils of dread through the crew. But Ahab, blind to all but his hate, presses on. His obsession has become a living thing, as monstrous and unyielding as Moby Dick himself. The third day breaks heavy with the weight of destiny. The air crackles with tension as Moby Dick turns his wrath upon the Pequod itself. The whale charges, his massive head a battering ram of flesh and bone. Wood splinters and metal screams as the ship shudders under the assault. Men scramble for purchase on the tilting decks, their world reduced to a nightmare of splintered wood and icy water. Ahab, standing defiant at the bow, sees his chance. With a cry that seems torn from the depths of his very soul, he hurls his harpoon. The iron bites deep, but fate has one final, cruel twist. The line wraps around the captain's neck like a hangman's noose. For a heartbeat, Ahab stands triumphant, a mad light in his eyes. Then with a final roar of defiance that echoes across the uncaring sea, he's yanked into the depths. Forever bound to his white whale, Ahab disappears beneath the waves, his quest for vengeance complete but hollow. The Pequod, mortally wounded, begins its death throes. As it sinks beneath the waves, it creates a vortex, a whirlpool of destruction that pulls the crew down into the cold, dark embrace of the sea. Screams turn to gurgles as the ocean claims its prize, but fate, it seems, is not done with this tale. Ishmael, thrown clear of the wreckage, finds salvation in Queequeg's coffin, now serving as a lifebuoy. For a day and a night, he drifts alone on the vast, uncaring ocean. The sun beats down mercilessly, the salt water stings his eyes, and all around him float the grim reminders of the Pequod's fate, broken timbers and lifeless bodies. Just as hope begins to fade, a ship appears on the horizon, a mirage-like vision of salvation. In a final, cruel irony, it's the Rachel, still searching for its own lost crew. As Ishmael is pulled from the water, the weight of his survival settles upon him like a physical burden. He alone remains to tell the tale of the Pequod's tragic fate and Ahab's manic quest for vengeance against the white whale. As the Rachel's sails fill with wind, carrying him back to the world of the living, Ishmael knows that the story of Moby Dick and the doomed Pequod will haunt him for the rest of his days. The vast, indifferent ocean stretches out behind them, its secrets and terrors hidden beneath the waves, waiting for the next foolhardy souls to challenge its depths.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.